Hello everyone, Mariko here.
And Kiyomi.
And welcome back to the Bridgewell Real Estate Group YouTube channel, where we talk about all things real estate, specifically in the Greater Vancouver area where we work as residential realtors. And in today's video, we are going to be talking about
assignment of contracts, specifically in pre-sale developments.
Yeah, and this is something that I have covered before, but this video is going to be a lot more comprehensive. If you've watched our other pre-sale videos before, you'll know that Kiyomi is the resident pre-sale expert in the Bridgewell Group team. So I brought her on today so that she can school me and everybody on pre-sales.
Largely debatable, but we will try. Mostly just to explain it in further detail.
Yeah, so we're going to be going through the timeline, the process, kind of what fees are involved for both the assignor and the assignee. We're going to be going through common restrictions.
Yep. And kind of give a bit of a breakdown of an example of an assignment of contract and how it looks from both sides, what assignee versus assignor is, because I think a lot of people get that mixed up. Even we do sometimes. So really just kind of breaking it down to make it a little bit easier for everybody who's looking to do that.
Cool.
Let's get into it.
Obviously, an excellent place to start is going to be the definition of what is an assignment of contract.
Yeah, definitely. And also who's involved in this process. Like we mentioned, specifically, we're going to be talking about pre-sales in this video. So when it comes to an assignment of contract, essentially what the baseline of it is that the original buyer is selling the contract to a new buyer. And so when you're looking at who's involved, you're going to have the original developer, so the developer who's selling the pre-sale property, and then you have the original buyer, who is going to be known as the assignor, so they're the one who bought the pre-sale property from the developer in the first place. And then you have the assignee, so that's a new buyer that's going to be coming in and purchasing the pre-sale contract from that assignor or the original buyer.
Yeah, and I think that it is also important to clarify, like when you're dealing with an assignment of contract, you are selling the contract to a new buyer. This is all happening before the pre-sale property has even completed.
Yeah.
So nobody even actually owns this property yet, aside from the developer. So that's a very important thing for everybody to understand. And so the original buyer, that assignor, is essentially going to be entering into a new listing contract, much like a resale situation where they're going to be hiring a realtor. And that realtor is going to be marketing the contract to sell to hopefully a new buyer, that assignee, prior to the completion date. And there's a lot of different reasons that we run into for people wanting to assign contracts, some of them being like financial, other just being personal, family structuring, whatever that be.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some of the more common ones that we've seen are, just a simple assignment where it's a family member to another family member. So for example, a parent assigning it to their child. Another common one we see is that, the person is realizing that they can't necessarily complete on the property anymore. A big one being, the financing has changed. So right now, obviously, our interest rates are quite high in Canada, whereas a few years ago they weren't. So maybe they purchased it 2-3 years ago, and now they're realizing that their numbers aren't really working just because the interest rates have increased quite a bit. Totally. So, and then another one being is just investors. So say they purchased the property again a couple years back, and the market value has increased since then. They're looking at it, they're realizing that they can make a profit off of it, and so they're looking to kind of get that appreciation and lift by selling the contract.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it's not always investors too, but
no,
it's just
true.
Like people that have done well from when they previously purchased it to what they could sell it for right now at market value. And so that appreciation in the assignment of contract world is called a lift. So that's a good piece of terminology for you to be aware of. And it kind of helps people to be able to cash out on that appreciation, but not have to technically complete on it and pay things like GST or property transfer tax, because all of the taxes get assigned to the assignee, the new buyer.
Yeah. So you can see how this can get very complex and very complicated very quickly. Yeah.
So when you are dealing with an assignment of contract and you're thinking about selling it, I think that first things first, you have to figure out the feasibility of selling it. Not just in terms of like, are you going to break even, which is obviously very important, but like, is the developer even going to be able to grant approval for this assignment of contract?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to kind of touch base on that, like when we were talking about earlier, who's involved in the pre-sale assignment of contract. situation, the developer really holds a lot of the power in terms of restrictions when it comes to selling your assignment of contract. So when you are a seller looking to assign your contract, it's really important to first look at essentially your contract, your addendums, your disclosure statement when you first bought, to know what these restrictions are, to see if you can even actually assign the property.
100%. And there is always in a presale contract, there's always a section on assignments. And it's usually like pages on pages on pages because there are a ton of restrictions. And so when determining the feasibility, it always starts with, is the developer even going to grant you approval based on a number of things that are typically outlined in the contract? So start there for sure.
Yeah, and if you're really unsure, then reach out to the sales staff, reach out to the developer and see kind of what those restrictions are, and you can cross-reference it back to your original documents. But I mean, when it comes to restrictions, I think the most common ones that you're going to see is going to be regarding your marketing of the assignment, the timeline, so when you can actually sell, and also
the price of what you can sell for.
Yeah, exactly. And so when it comes to marketing, you know, the big one is that they won't let you put it on a lot of things. So whether that's the MLS, which is the realtor kind of server in terms of marketing homes, that's a big one.
It's like the portal that connects to every public site, reciprocity. It's a huge marketing tool, and most of the time they don't want you to do it on there because they don't want, I think the logic behind it is they don't want to cannibalize any sales that they have outstanding, or they don't want to I think have the public perceive that people are selling it and don't want to keep the units. So.
Yeah, for sure. Because if, you know, all of a sudden there's 50 units in the development that are selling on the MLS, people are going to be like, well, is this a bad development? Like, what's going on with that? Yeah. So the MLS is a big one. Usually you can't put it on there. Yeah. And then there might even be restrictions in terms of like putting it on social media, putting it
online at all. It has to be like private.
Exactly. Kind of yeah. So that's why you'll hear a lot of it being an exclusive listing when it comes to marketing and assignment of contract. The other big one is going to be the timeline. So when you can sell, we've started seeing this a little bit more in contracts lately where they'll give kind of that specific timeline. Really also has to do with what Mariko mentioned in terms of whether or not it's sold out or not. Because really, if the developer is still selling units, they don't want to cannibalize their own listings. Yeah. So it might be that you can't assign a contract until the development's fully sold out. It could be that, you know, it has to be done within a certain time frame. We actually just saw this with the contract where it was like, you can't sell 6 months before the completion or estimated completion, and then you can't sell it for another year or two because the project was a bit further out. Yeah. So a specific timeline, that's really important to check as well. But you know, when it comes to these timelines, again, you can always ask the developer and kind of get a better idea of it.
Yeah. And then last but not least is price. I think that's a big one. Sometimes if we're going back to the situation where a buyer can't complete, unfortunately, if it just happens to be the case that the market is not doing so well compared to when they bought it, we have seen situations where the original buyer, but the sellers in this situation, tried to sell it for less than the contract price, and the developer won't allow that. So those are typically the restrictions that we see. Yeah. And then in terms of the feasibility of an assignment of contract outside of those restrictions, I think most people want to come out even or hopefully on top. And so it's really important that you run your numbers and are just aware of the costs. The big one that you're going to find on the contract right away is going to be the assignment fee itself. Yeah. So when you are selling that assignment, when you're the assignor, again, there's typically a fee, and I mean, we're seeing it range anywhere from like 2 to 5% right now.
Sometimes you'll see a flat fee as well, and honestly, you'll see this too, where if it's an incentive time for that pre-sale as well, they might say like $0 assignment fee or like something like that. But it's important to know that even if it's a $0, 0% assignment fee, that you still actually have to pay an admin fee. So just keep that in mind in terms of those sorts of fees as well.
Yeah, definitely. So when you're looking at that assignment fee, if it is applicable, typically it's based off of the new, or I guess the greater of the two contract prices. So make sure that you are running the numbers on the assignment fee based on rough market value of what you think you could sell it for. And then plus the real estate commissions that you're going to be paying. And then if those, if your profit has gone up enough to exceed or break even and cover the costs that are associated with assigning, then very generally it makes it a lot more feasible.
Yeah, for sure.
So kind of breaking down those costs a little bit further, I mean, I think it's important to separate it into like typical costs for the assignor and then typical costs for the assignees.
Yeah, exactly. And so when it comes to the cost for the assignor, which is that original buyer, the seller of the assignment of contract, your big ones are going to be the listing commissions if you're working with a realtor. You also have the assignment fee, which we just mentioned, as well as any legal fees that essentially come with the agreement as well. And so the big one is going to be that assignment fee. And I think it's really important to know when that assignment fee is going to be due. So a lot of people think that it's going to be due at completion. Once you get paid and you have all your money, you're like, okay, cool, I'll just pay the assignment fee at the same time. But that's typically not the case. The assignment fee is typically required to be paid at the end of the subject removal period when it comes to the assignment of contract.
Yeah, and so, like literally like I would say like during subject removal, because typically one of the subjects that's on the contract is subject to developer approval.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
Going back to like what we were talking about before, it's like there's multiple times when you have to get developer approval. You get developer approval to list the place, to assign the place, and then you actually have to have subject to developer approval on the contract that you receive in order to sell it.
Yeah, so I think knowing that that assignment fee is going to be due, because for example, if it's 2.5% or if it's 5%, you know, that can be a very decent chunk of change. And I think that knowing that you need to have that money available to be able to actually go through with the firm deal of the assignment of contract is super important.
Super, super important. Especially if someone is tight on change or like needs to open up a line of credit to even be able to pay this assignment fee, all of those things. It's good to know when that's due. And then moving on to the assignee, there's a lot of costs as well. Obviously legal applies to like both the buy side and the sell side. But I think that the big ones are the deposit reimbursement, and then also the lift reimbursement, and when that happens, as well as the taxes. So when you are the assignee for the property, you are covering all of the taxes that are due at completion, because again, you're taking over that contract. So where we are in BC here, that typically is GST, which is 5%, and then the property transfer tax, unless you qualify for an exemption. And so kind of getting into that like lift and deposit portion a little bit more, you really have to just understand like how assignments work with regards to that. So typically what happens is the assignor, the original buyer, has put forward a certain amount of deposit funds. Oftentimes you're seeing like anywhere between 10 at a low to 15 to 20 is pretty common of the original purchase price. So that money has already been put forward, right? So when you are that new buyer coming in, typically you are reimbursing the original buyer of those deposit funds. And then going back to like profits, appreciations, things like that. If the contract that the assignee is purchasing is a lower value than what the market value is, then that difference, that appreciation, is called the lift, and then also gets reimbursed to the assignor. And when those are due is really dependent on how the contract is written.
So when it comes to deposit and lifts, it's really important to know when those are going to be due. And so when you're looking at your contract, there's 3 ways essentially where this is going to be broken down. And so the first one is going to be that deposit and lift are due at subject removal. Yeah,
and this is like obviously getting more of the money up front or earlier in the process. So it's obviously more beneficial for the assignor, the original buyer, in most situations, because they're selling, they want their money as fast as possible. And I think that in the terms of the way that I typically see this, it's like if the completion is really, really far away, typically those sellers don't want to wait for their money. So we see that negotiated more often than not when the completion is far out.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of that being the second option is going to be all the funds at completion, which is obviously, like Mariko just mentioned, maybe not as beneficial to the seller, especially if it's a far way out, because they have to wait to get all of their money until completion. You might see this more commonly if the completion is sooner. So say, for example, in a matter of a few months, sellers might be more open to that option as well.
Totally. It's like they're getting their money sooner. Sometimes it's like they're between a rock and a hard place and they're just happy to find a buyer.
Yeah, totally.
Then it's like, okay, like let's just get it sold and I'll get my money like in a pretty quick turnaround time.
Yeah.
I think that with that one there's obviously a risk portion involved with it, where it's like the assignees don't really have like any money or like skin in the game. So that is a little bit more risky, because technically if the assignee doesn't complete, the assignor is still responsible for completing. Assigning doesn't just totally take them off the hook. But again, that is one option, is just doing it all at completion.
But I think maybe kind of a nice one for both parties is going to be a hybrid model. So essentially you pay part of the portions now, whether that's half or a different sort of split.
Just the deposit,
just
subject removal.
Exactly, and then pay the lift kind of at completion. So you also see that split happen as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really common, is like getting that deposit at subject removal and then getting the lift at the completion time.
Totally.
I think that one of the hardest things that we run into for assignees is just like having the capital available to even buy an assignment of contract, because when you're dealing with reimbursement of deposit and a lift, like this is like hundreds of thousands of dollars in a lot of situations that we deal with. So that hybrid makes a lot of sense. And then I think last but not least, there's also just the option where you go rogue and you write your own contract and you decide like how you want to have that set up, whether it be like a random schedule, like 5%, 5%, 5%, 5%.
Yeah, just kind of a payment schedule set up between the assignor and the assignee, kind of similar to when you buy like a pre-sale contract right off the bat. The developer has that, you know, five due now, 10 due later, 5 due in the future, like essentially that sort of setup with the assignor and assignee instead. Yeah.
So to finalize it all, the options that you typically have in terms of the process for the deposit and lift are going to be all of the deposit and lift at subject removal, all of the deposit and lift at completion, a hybrid of money at subject removal and money at completion, often like the deposit at subject removal and then the lift at completion, or the option to negotiate it freely amongst yourselves to something that's agreeable to both parties.
So to kind of help break those deposits, lifts, costs, that kind of complex process in a little bit more detail, we're going to kind of break it down into a real life example. So Mariko's going to be the assignor. She's looking to assign her contract, and I will be the assignee. I'm coming in and I'm looking to purchase that contract.
So let's make the assumption that I bought the pre-sale originally for $500,000 and that it's a standard pre-sale that has a 20% deposit schedule. I've already paid all of those deposits, so I've already put forward $100,000 to this pre-sale purchase. And then let's say that the market's gone way up and that the market value of the property today is $700,000. And I've already got the developer approval for the listing of it. Kiyomi's come around and she said, "Hey Mariko, I want to buy this property
in this really cool development that's sold out."
And she's willing to pay $700,000. So the lift, that appreciation, is $700,000 minus $500,000, which is what I originally bought it for, which equals
$200,000.
$200,000 is the lift. And then, as I mentioned before, the deposit is $100,000. So going back to those scenarios previously, we could have all at subject removal if I'm really lucky and I get all my money up front. That's the $200,000 lift plus the $100,000 deposit reimbursement means I'm going to get $300,000 at subject removal. The other option is on the other side of the scale. It could happen all at completion. I'm going to leave myself open to risk as that seller, but hopefully completion is relatively soon and Kiyomi's going to give it all to me then, because she doesn't have the money to be able to give me anything up front.
And I think that that's kind of just like going off here, is that's why it can be really hard for assignees to come in and purchase these contracts, because maybe they don't have $300,000 available at subject removal. So that's where it can get a little bit tricky in terms of having all these funds up front.
Definitely. It's like they want a new property, maybe they value pre-sales, but they can't keep up with the deposit schedule of a pre-sale, right? So this is an option to just have things at funding instead. And then the more common situation is going to be partially at subject removal. So let's say the deposit is all at subject removal. Kiyomi's going to give me $100,000.
Take my money.
Subjects are removed. And then the other lift is coming at completion.
So that's going to be that $200,000 at completion.
And with this as well, I think that we see that most commonly, I would say.
Definitely.
And going back to like really important things for you to know, it's very important that for you as the assignor, so in my situation, Kiyomi is not giving me that deposit until after subjects are removed.
Yeah.
But I need to pay the assignment fee during subject removal. So you really, really have to make sure that those funds are available, because there's going to be a subject on the contract that says subject to developer's approval of Kiyomi purchasing this property and taking over that contract.
Yeah.
And I'm going to need to pay that assignment fee. Then we are going to remove subjects for both the assignor and the assignee. And then Kiyomi is going to, hypothetically in this situation, pay me the deposit reimbursement.
Yeah, so you can't essentially use that deposit money to pay that assignment fee.
Yeah.
So again, this is why it's really important to know when all of these funds are due, and making sure that you have those funds available as well when you're going throughout this process. Another really important point is going to be that if you do have someone as an assigner, if you have someone come in and buy the property as the assignee, the contract, then you are not necessarily absolved from all of your responsibilities of that contract. So if the buyer came in, the assignee didn't complete at completion, you as the assignor, the original buyer of the contract, are still responsible to complete on that property. And I think some people, like you said, think that they're just off the hook. They have someone come in, they purchased it, they're like, cool, I have my money, whatever the case may be, and they're like, I'm out. But it's not. You really have to know that you are still responsible to complete if your buyer or assignee does not complete.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so that's it. That's all.
That is it for today's assignment of contract video. Again, my name is Mariko.
I'm Kiyomi.
This is Kiyomi.
Thanks so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.
We'll see you on the next one.